Welcome to tonight's session. If you are joining us to have this critical conversation about affirmative action and admissions and what it means in terms of today's Supreme Court ruling, you're in the right place. We're asking that you announce yourself in the chat as usual as NAACP peers, and we will be getting started shortly. Welcome. If you are joining us tonight for this critical conversation on the Supreme Court ruling, you're in the right place. As you see, folks are announcing themselves in the chat. Please take a moment to announce yourself in the chat per usual, and we will be getting started shortly. Good evening, everyone. I believe we have critical mass and we'll get started. My name is Jamal Watkins, and I proudly serve as the Senior Vice President of Strategy and Advancement of the NAACP, but most importantly, I am a card-carrying, proud activist that's a part of the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization known as the NAACP. Tonight, we are here because we have seen our country be in a spiral as it relates to the pandemic, and now a spiral as it relates to policies being rolled back by the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court of the United States. And so tonight we're going to have a critical strategic conversation about what many of you have been following on the news and hearing throughout the day, the decision regarding race being used as a consideration in admissions in higher education. Again, we understand that when the world is on fire, it is us, those who are doing the work in community, that are here to push back, fight back, and put out all of the flames. And so tonight you will be hearing from speakers who will give you insights on what's real, what's happening, what's the strategic thrust forward, and how do we continue to make a way when it seems like all things are lost. And so, without further ado, we're going to get started. Again, welcome to the NAACP's conversation about the attack on the use of race as it relates to higher admissions in terms of higher education. Our first speaker for the evening is the leader of this great association who heads up the board of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He comes from the great state of Florida, a state who has known many battles, and he himself has fought in many battles. And so without further ado, we're going to hear from none other than our chairman, Mr. Leon Russell. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamal, and good evening to everyone who has joined us this evening. We come before you this evening in what I believe should be considered crisis mode. Now, I know that my professional staff, who will all join in this conversation are going to talk to you about the specifics of the case. They're going to talk about their understanding of what the legal parameters of this ruling are. But I want to tell you tonight that we as a community stand in serious danger. And I need the folks who have joined this Zoom to understand that elections have consequences. We are seeing what can happen to public policy when we fail to recognize the importance of elections. I speak to you tonight as chairman of the National Board of Directors, but I also speak to you as someone who served as a director of affirmative action and human rights for over 35 years in the public sector. And so I want to make it clear to you from the outset that you will hear that this ruling to a degree is limited. But my 35 years of professional experience teach me that when the court rules negatively on any aspect of affirmative action, it has a ripple effect on everyone who is doing work in diversity and inclusion. And so I want you to understand from the outset, my perspective, and this may be harsh for some, but quite frankly, when we start to talk about reparations in this country and in this association, we need to get away from dealing with monetary value and start to understand that true reparations in this nation will only occur when we recognize that we must change for the better, eliminate the current effects of past discrimination. And that means that reparations means repairing the systemic institutional racism that impacts every area of life in this United States of America. Understand me clearly. Understand where I'm coming from. We have got to deal, first of all, we need to face the fact that whether it's education, as it is in this particular instance, or whether it's your job, whether it's business opportunity, the thing that continues to hold us back as a people is, in fact, the current effects of past discrimination. And those current effects are, quite frankly, sustained by institutional racism. Those things, those strategies, those policies, those techniques and practices that have been baked into the system over the years that continue to deny folks opportunity and equity across the board. So we have to understand that when we talk about reparations, we've got to talk about fixing that system, eliminating the current effects of past discrimination. This court, in my opinion, has become not a court of justice, but a court of politics. The ruling today reflects quite vividly the political environment that we live in. Let me repeat that. The court reflects the political environment in which we live. Understand that diversity and inclusion are under attack. They're under political attack. They're under attack by persons who make and implement public policy in this country. It now runs the gamut from policymakers at the state and local level to our courts and to those who would seek the highest office in the land. And so we have to recognize the political aspect of what the court did today and what the court is saying and how it fits with the mode that we find ourselves in politically. That means that we have to redouble our effort to educate folks about the importance of courts with respect to how public policy is going to be carried out. Because this particular ruling, in my opinion, and I'm not the lawyer amongst us, but in my opinion, it's one more nail trying to be driven into a coffin that people want to build to keep certain people from really experiencing the American dream. And so I say to you that even though there may be reluctance, we are going to have to deal with what this court has done from a political perspective. And yes, that does include looking at the size of the court, determining how the court should be reformed. I think that is absolutely necessary for us. But it also says that we have to understand the import of elections because elected folk appoint judges. An elected person appoints justices to the United States Supreme Court. We have seen that those who have planned long and hard to change the political persuasion of the United States Supreme Court have done so successfully. We only turn that around when we undertake our own political process to remedy the situation. Understand that it won't be immediate. It will be a marathon and not a sprint. But we've got to begin now to explain to people in our communities why their vote is so important and why the fact that they failed to vote in many instances over the last few years has led us to this point. And so, yes, affirmative action may not have breathed its last breath, but it's certainly in the ICU. And the only surgeons that can save diversity and inclusion, that can bring equity to this nation are you. The people on this call who will talk to people in your communities and inspire them to engage in the political process, inspire them to support folks who understand the importance of a real reparative system in this country. You want reparations, fix institutional racism. That is the most important kind of reparation that we as a people can obtain. And so, Jamal, I turn it back to you with this last statement. Your hair ought to be on fire. you ought to be fired up. You actually ought to be angry enough to organize and inspire your community to understand why we're fired up, why we understand that we must fight this fight, because when we fight, we win.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the message is clear that we are under attack. But the message is also clear that we are a powerful and formidable army, if you will. And tonight we will hear from our next speaker, who is actually our general, our president and CEO from the great state of Mississippi, Mr. Derrick Johnson. President Johnson, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start where you concluded. This is a marathon. It is a marathon in which we will win. It's a marathon in a race that we've been a part of. In 1935, Charles Hamilton Houston joined as special counsel to the NAACP, thus establishing our legal department. He came so as in the backdrop of being Dean of Howard University School of Law. And he had in mind a long-term strategy to challenge the notion of separate but equal. And in the midst of that, he also recognized, while he was dean, the need to train a set of legal scholars who can go across the country and recruit potential plaintiffs and file cases. That strategy was a marathon strategy. There was no one silver bullet. That strategy also was engineered because we were the NAACP, with units across the country in local communities with lived experience, not academic theory, not armchair revolutionaries, but people who are actually living in communities impacted by the negative realities of the public policies that was adopted by local, state, and in many cases, the federal government. In 1954, the Supreme Court made a decision. 1955, they made a second decision, all related to that separate but equal was not the law of the land, but the remedy was to implement an approach with all deliberate speed. All deliberate speed within itself is an oxymoron. And so it took another decade and a half to actually realize the court's mandate. And so we began to see in the late 60s and 70s, the implementation of the court's mandate of separate but equal would no longer be tolerated. I give that history with the complete understanding that we are the NAACP. We have eyes and ears on the ground. We operate from strategy, not personality. The brand identity is what we all gather under to ensure that democracy works for all. What the Supreme Court has just done is in reaction to several public policies decisions that started in 1932 and moved forward. And that was in the backdrop of the conservative ultra-right movement creating an organization called the John Birch Society. The John Birch Society began to organize in ways in which was counter to the notion of democracy. They linked up with an intellectual by the name of William F. Buckley, who then realized that there was a set of Dixiecrats in the South who were upset because they lost a war between the states. And as a result of that, and because of the Barry Goldwater presidential run, they consolidated to be a movement that have fought for the last 50 years to overturn key civil rights legislation and court decisions. This is a marathon. We can show clearly what we have done as an African-American community with the strategy of creating the NAACP, with the strategy of our legal department under the vision of Charles Hamilton Houston going to Thurgood Marshall, and how we have fought. We can see clearly what has happened in reaction to what was taking place with John Birch Society, William F. Buckley, and the creation of what's called the Movement Conservative, and their goal to overturn some of the most important pieces of legislation, from the Voting Rights Act, Civil Rights Act, all the way to affirmative action. We sit here today recognizing that America is the most diverse it has ever been, that our future is deeply vested in equipping young minds of many backgrounds and communities to be prepared to be leaders in the backdrop of a global economy and a global community. We also recognize that the conservative forces are in fear because they will no longer be in the governing majority. Affirmative action is absolutely important. That if you understand the history of the civil rights movement, it really stands on three critical legs of a stool. One, our ability to train and educate our young people for a future to be productive citizens, not only for their families and their communities, to preserve democracy. Two, our ability to access the voting booth so we can inform the formation of public policy, thus corporate policy. And three, our ability to negotiate for our labor, whether it's individually or collectively. Those are the legs of the three-legged stool that we stand on in the civil rights movement. And what the Supreme Court decision did today was to attack one of those three legs, our ability to train and educate our young people for a prosperous future, as well as limit our ability to participate in a diverse labor workforce where we can be included at the highest level. The work of the NAACP must be to strengthen and restore all three legs. And it's that third leg that we have to rely on, because elections have consequences. Those members of the Supreme Court are only there as a result of presidential elections. We also know this would not be solved by having a march or demonstration. This can only be solved by ensuring that the 2024 election cycle represent the needs and interests that we all represent. And let's be clear, this is not about a partisan push. This is not about a political party or a candidate. This is about the needs and interests of the communities we represent. Our ability to protect democracy, our fight to ensure that equal protection under the law is afforded to all citizens, and our connectivity so that we work together, we thrive together as we fight together. And so what we have witnessed with this Supreme Court is an effort that has been ongoing for decades. And finally, they had the right lineup of individuals to advance a ruling that's countered the notion of not only equal protection under the law, but countered the notion that when you have governmental sanctioned harm, there must be governmental sanctioned repair. Affirmative action is a response to centuries long governmental sanctioned Jim Crow laws and the system of slavery. And in order for this nation to make amends, this was a remedial step to address those harms so we can position individuals in a way in which we can tap into the genius that we all bring to the table. Our fight is now beginning. It is a marathon that we will win, not that we can win, we will win. But we can only do so if we're smart about it, strategic about it, and understand clearly what the pressure points are. Eliminating this level of discrimination is important. But we must fight for diversity at all costs. Diversity is a must. It is a business imperative for businesses to understand that their leadership, their decision makers must reflect their consumers. It is important for us to prepare the next generation of leaders, and those leaders who look like America, diverse, dynamic, and talented. And our universities must come up with a solution to counter what took place at the Supreme Court. Now, a side note here, what we heard from the president is really important because he advanced a notion of creating a standard for those who have lived through a reality that has not been the best reality. That is race neutral, but yet consider factors such as individuals who have been discriminated against, what schools individuals attended, and whether or not those schools were properly funded to position those individuals to be successful. So we have to look at what should be the new standard. The Supreme Court has chipped away at race-based solutions for decades, creating a higher standard in terms of strict scrutiny. It is incumbent upon the NAACP, our allies, to push not only the administration, but come up with a new standard. And that will be the work moving forward as we ensure that the next set of elections, especially the 2024 presidential, congressional, and senatorial elections, reflect an outcome that will live up to the needs and interests of our community. So I want to thank you for joining this call. Jamal, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will be here to answer any questions that any of our participants will have.
Thank you, Mr. President. And it is clear that diversity is a must. We are grateful for the 2,000 plus participants on tonight's call, but I know many of you are here to talk about, therefore what? What is our strategy? What are we going to do given that this court has made the wrong decision? And so our next speaker happens to be a daughter of the South, a recovering litigator, if you will, and she also happens to be our chief of strategy, Ms. Yumika Rushing, who will kickstart the conversation about what are we going to do and what is the pivot forward. Yumika, the floor is yours.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here this evening. And I can tell you, when this decision came out this morning, I was a little somber. And I looked at my colleagues around the country, from philanthropy to corporations to businesses, and I think we all were kind of crushed. We're a little tired of this fight, but we've got to gear up and make sure that we combat all of this. We can't stand still. We've got to move and make sure that we are ready for the long haul. I listened as the court, we all eagerly awaited this decision, but today Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson wrote in her dissent, the majority turned the clock back, indulging those who either don't know our nation's history or long to repeat it. The decision stacks the deck with other recent and unprecedented rollbacks. It cuts deep because this time it's about our children. And I'm a mother, so I felt that pain today. But this isn't the first time that the nation's laws have worked against us. And I'm reminded that we have always turned to each other to strategize, to mobilize, to plan, act, and to fight, and to protect the liberties we so richly deserve. When laws stop working for us, we depend on the grassroots. The door may be closed, but now we're going to have to open a window. And I love that saying because it comes from my grandmother, an old NAACPer who knew about the fight that's in this group. We are resolved to work community by community, school by school, company by company, and to ensure diversity no matter what. I'm pleased today to be joined by a group of my colleagues who'll share our approach for this year and beyond. And so to kick us off, we are asking all individuals from our networks, our members, our partners, including you on this call, to sign a petition that urges colleges, universities, and corporations across the country to commit to diversity no matter what. We need our leaders throughout the country to apply pressure, to call on higher education institutions in their states to publicly commit to this pledge of diversity no matter what, to scale representation and to help our students succeed. We will hold institutions accountable through a variety of mechanisms, but really focused on mapping, tracking, and scorecards. One of the things I think is so critical for us to remember tonight is this is our America. This is our America. And this is not the future that we want for ourselves, and it's not the future that we want for our children. This opinion has far-reaching implications. And so when laws stop working for us, we depend on you, the NAACP. And we will stay fired up and ready to fight anything that looks like dismantling of our rights. So I want to invite Jamal to share with you the lineup tonight. There are several who will talk to you about this emerging strategy. And we look forward to engaging you over the weeks and months to come as active participants in this fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Yumika. As you all are hearing, the theme is very clear: diversity no matter what. From the chairman of our board, our president and CEO, our chief strategy officer, we are in phase one of this work. And as you see in the chat, our petition link has been dropped because we're going to continue to build out and build this muscle that will hopefully move the needle in the right direction, because as the chairman set up, we are under attack. And so the next speaker you will hear from is one of the great legal minds in this nation. She leads our Office of General Counsel, which has a rich and long legacy of thought-provoking, groundbreaking legal scholars who have been able to apply their work in a way that's catalytic. And so the next voice you will hear from is none other than our General Counsel, Jeanette McCarthy-Wallace.
Thank you, Jamal, and good evening, everyone. Good evening to Chairman Russell, to President Derek Johnson, and to my distinguished colleagues. On October 31st, 2022, the United States Supreme Court heard two cases brought by a conservative group pushing to end race-conscious admission policies. The lawsuits, which challenged the legality of admissions policies at Harvard College and the University of North Carolina, are the latest in a mission to erase the consideration of race and ethnicity in American law and society, including from policies that were enacted to combat long-standing racial discrimination. In Students for Fair Admissions versus President and Fellows of Harvard College, the plaintiffs allege that Harvard's race-conscious admissions policy discriminates against Asian American applicants, alleging that Asian Americans are less likely to be admitted under these policies. In Students for Fair Admissions versus University of North Carolina, plaintiffs argued that UNC discriminates against white and Asian applicants by awarding racial preferences to Black, Hispanic, and Native American students because they are classified by the school as underrepresented minorities. The lower courts ruled in favor of the universities in both cases. When the Supreme Court granted certiorari, the NAACP filed an amicus brief and argued that reliance on Brown versus Board of Education to impose race-ignorant admissions contradicts the context, purpose, and very meaning of that decision, and that reversal of long-standing precedent on race-conscious admissions would cause immeasurable harm to public education and the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. Today, in a stunning reversal of precedent, the United States Supreme Court held that the admissions policies of both schools violated the 14th Amendment. The court found that universities failed to operate their race-based admissions programs in a manner that is sufficiently measurable to permit judicial review under the rubric of strict scrutiny. The court found that when a university admits students on the basis of race, It engages in the, quote, offensive and demeaning assumption that students of a particular race, because of their race, think alike, unquote. The court found that the admissions program lacked a logical endpoint. Notwithstanding, and I am going to be very candid, I believe that the Supreme Court got this wrong, but notwithstanding this, the court did explain that nothing in this opinion should be construed as prohibiting universities from considering an applicant's discussion of how race affected his or her life, be it through discrimination, inspiration, or otherwise. A benefit to the student who overcame racial discrimination, for example, must be tied to that student's courage and determination, or a benefit to a student whose heritage or culture motivated him or her to assume a leadership role or attain a particular goal must be tied to that student's unique ability to contribute to the university. In other words, the court found that the student must be treated the same based on his or her experiences as an individual, not because of race. To put it mildly, we are deeply disappointed in the court's decision today. Indeed, it threatens to pave the way to the return to America's ugly past of racial discrimination in higher education. Make no mistake, today's opinion was the result of a concerted effort to prevent future advancements of people of color and to undermine the gains that have been made by Black students and other students of color in accessing higher education. We are deeply, deeply disappointed. However, we will continue the fight for diversity in higher education, and we will continue to push our universities to commit to university no matter what. Office of General Counsel stands committed to work with the units to advance for the worthy goal of diversity in education. Let me be clear, this is personal to the NAACP. This is personal to me. I am the proud beneficiary of affirmative action. And while today, again, is deeply disappointing, we are undeterred. We're going to continue this fight. And as our wonderful chairman says, when we fight, we win. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Madam General Counsel. And what is clear about the notion of when we fight, we win is the key word, we. The NAACP does not do this work alone, and we are grateful to the many strategic partnerships that we have across our faith communities, across the Divine Nine, and in various organizations throughout the nation. And we see, as you all are signing in the chat, that this is a phase one to say we will not be moved and we're going to continue the fight forward. Now, our next speaker is no stranger to the notion of we. She actually is a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. More importantly, she is another brilliant legal strategic thinker who has done great work on the Hill and now serves as Senior Vice President of Global Policy and Strategy and Advocacy. And so none other than Patrice Willoughby, who will walk us through exactly what this moment means in terms of the policy fights that we have to really mount in order to win, if you will. Patrice, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you everyone for being here with us this evening. As our general counsel reviewed in the opinion, there are several top lines that have come out that actually implicate and point the way toward how we will address this turn back of affirmative action. The court criticized the programs at UNC and Harvard by saying that the stated goals of the programs can't be measured. There's no clear connection between goals and policies, that the policies actually require stereotyping members of races, that there's no endpoint to them, but the bright spot, race, can still be considered. In effect, the court's argument is really circular because in criticizing the fact that the programs are not measurable, the 1978 Bakke case ruled that the use of racial quotas is unconstitutional. So taken on its face with the other findings of the court, we can ascertain clearly that the court has disfavored any race-conscious approach to remedies that would assist African Americans and other people of color. But this doesn't make any sense in the real sense. For years now, companies like McKinsey, Accenture, and others have quantified the value of diversity, equity, inclusion, and its benefit to profitability, success, and results. The Bank of America actually quantified the drag on the US economy that is caused by racism. So this points to the way that we will have to collectively work to address this ruling, both in higher education and in other areas. We don't expect that this ruling will stop at higher education. We expect that the next forefront will be areas like Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and potentially other programs that have been enacted by corporations and others to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion. So at the NAACP, we have been anticipating this. And in coming days and months, we are going to focus on results and outcomes, data-driven insights that clearly point the way to how programs need to be specifically targeted and approached to ensure that equity remains a core value and that opportunity remains in place for African Americans and others around the country. We know that democracy is essential to our success. As President Johnson earlier indicated, this is an attempt to cut off the feeder that allows progress in this country to go forward. And so we want you to know that we are standing with you. We will continue this fight. Stay tuned for more, and we will be rolling out other aspects of our Diversity No Matter What pledge, specifically focused on data and outcomes in the days to come.
Thank you, Patrice. And for those of you who have not had a chance to connect with the leadership in terms of policy and legislation, you know the names like a Charles Hamilton Houston, a Wade Henderson, and now Leader Patrice Willoughby. And so as we continue to do this work on the Hill and in the halls of Congress, we're going to continue the fight forward. But let's pivot back to what it means for college campuses. Our next speaker is no stranger to the university system. In fact, he is a tenured professor at the Howard University and the leader of our Center for Education Equity, Dr. Ivory Tolson, who will talk to us about what the core strategy looks like as we pivot forward in this moment. Dr. Tolson?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jamal. And like all of you all, I'm outraged by this decision. We do consider this to be a blatant attack on the rights of Black people and our opportunities, and affront to us, and really an uplifting of white privilege. Only a few years ago, there was the Operation Varsity Blues, where the federal government exposed all of the ways in which white people have been gaming the system, many times with the enabling of institutions of higher education, things like legacy admissions, children of donors. And in fact, when you look at all of the white students at Harvard University, 43% of them came in through a non-merit process, but yet they want to attack Black people and other people who are from underrepresented races on any theoretical slots that we're taking up. So I want to talk a little bit about our strategy moving forward, looking at what this might mean for how we ask for what we deserve in education. So one of the first things I want to say that's very important, and I've done 3 interviews today. Everyone who interviewed me, New York Times, CBS, and Al Jazeera, all of them asked, how does this affect other types of opportunities for Black people? Does this mean that we can't have affirmative action in employment and things like that. And my response to that is always no. That is much more broad than what this particular ruling has said. And in fact, when you look at the primary majority decision that was written by Roberts, he doesn't use the words affirmative action once. So we are continuing to say that this refers to admissions, race-conscious admissions, and nothing else. And that's why diversity no matter what is so important. We talked about diversity no matter what internally in our strategy meetings weeks ago. When this ruling came out, we saw that language mirrored by President Biden in his comments. Secretary Cardona, who's going to be speaking at our national convention, Justice Jackson and Justice Sotomayor said, although the court has stripped almost all uses of race in college admissions, university can still and should continue to use all available tools to meet society's need for diversity in education. I've looked through the ruling. I did searches for scholarship. It doesn't appear anywhere in the context that scholarships for Black students are prohibited under this law. I looked for recruiting. Colleges still can recruit Black students. And what we want is for colleges and universities to commit to diversity no matter what, to use all of the tools available to them. And the Supreme Court, even though they are ideologically flawed, they did leave a lot of tools on the table. And we plan to tell all the universities that they should use these tools and evaluate how they're using the tools. So there's 4 things that we're going to be asking for. First, we're going to ask for every university to state their commitment to diversity no matter what. We have our own pledge that they could sign, but we know that universities are carving out their own commitments. We've been receiving those commitments. And what we're going to be doing is evaluating those commitments. We're going to see whether or not a university actually has a commitment and a plan to address this. And we're going to see what those plans are. And these plans should include things like hiring more diverse faculty, having special services and support groups for Black students, to fortify Black student unions, and to make sure that they have financial aid and support for Black students. We also want to look at other aspects of the admissions process. We want to make sure that they're not using racially biased entrance examinations, and they're using a whole student profile that's not just limited to these rigid data points, but look at the entire characteristics of the students. We also want to make sure that they're supporting HBCUs and other minority serving institutions that are serving, that's going to be serving a lot of the students who don't want to go into a hostile environment of universities that don't want them. So I want to conclude by saying that it's important for us to uphold this value of diversity no matter what, and understand that we are on the winning side of this. Harvard and UNC, they should be applauded for going to court to support these students, but let's not be fooled by their motives. They want our students because our students make their institutions great. And every college and university that's willing to assert that are college and universities that we can work with. So thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Tolson. Now we need to be crystal clear that our strategy is to look at and to go after the commitments that need to be made for diversity, equity, and inclusion at 532 public colleges and universities and 1,134 private colleges and universities. So the roadmap is clear. The universities and colleges that have to double down on its commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion are literally in our line sight. They're in your backyards. They're in your communities. And so this petition is a part of phase 1. The data analytics around Therefore What is a part of phase 2. But we're going to be leaning on our units, our partners, and our branches to make sure that the universities from Harvard to Howard are committed not only to opening up the windows because a door has been closed, but to ensure that the data shows that we're turning a corner. And as we think about college campuses and universities and young people, we have the leader of our Youth and College Division, Mr. Wisdom Cole. Wisdom, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jamal. To say that today was a difficult day would be an understatement. You know, we understand that affirmative action exists historically because we're not able to rely on institutions to enact policies that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me be clear. Many of the structures and policies in place of these institutions are rooted in white supremacy. And what we need in this moment is for colleges and universities and all of our institutions to commit to embracing diversity no matter what. Many of the practices within admissions, curriculum, and culture deter both the matriculation and retention of students of color. We need to dismantle the structures that are rooted in white supremacy. This includes standardized testing, exorbitant rising costs of tuition, and addressing the micro and macro aggressions that students of color face in higher education every day. To every student hearing this decision today, know this: you still matter, and we need to keep showing up. We need your gifts, your talents. We need your leadership. Don't allow them to tell you that you don't belong. We are with you. We will fight together, and you belong because we all belong. The Supreme Court decision doesn't reflect what the majority of us believe and know is right for our country. And so it's absolutely important for us to understand how the affirmative action decision, as well as the upcoming student debt relief decision tomorrow, ties into higher education equity. We understand that these issues are interconnected. As the NAACP, we have been leading in the fight to cancel student debt, and we are awaiting the decision that is going to come down tomorrow. If the Supreme Court fails to strike down affirmative action and the President Biden student loan forgiveness plan, they are putting us on a path to resegregate our educational system and deny Black Americans a fair opportunity at the so-called American dream. Regardless of what the court decides, it's up to President Biden to deliver on his promises to the American people, and it's up to every institution in this country to pledge their commitment to embrace diversity no matter what. It's up to the institutions that have historically closed the doors to Black people solely based on race and not on the merit to commit. We must continue to fight for diversity, stand for equity, and demand inclusion in every aspect of our lives. Young people have been continuously coming to rally, pushing their universities, pushing the policy necessary, and we want to make sure we are continuing that fight. So tomorrow, as decision day comes down for a student debt program, we want to recognize that there are 4 scenarios that we are looking at. The first scenario being that the Supreme Court finds that both sets of the plaintiffs lack standing and rules in the favor of the administration, allowing the debt relief for 40 million borrowers to go forward. The second scenario being that the Supreme Court finds that the program is appropriate exercise of the HEROES Act and the authorities are allowed in debt relief for 40 million borrowers go forward. The third and fourth scenario, which we hope doesn't happen, is that the Supreme Court invalidates the debt relief plan and rules in the favor of plaintiffs. And in this scenario, the majority of justices would agree to grant both set of plaintiffs standing and rules that the debt relief plan is legal under the Administrative Procedure Act and under major question doctrine. The fourth scenario is that the Supreme Court invalidates the debt relief plan and rules in the favor of one set of plaintiffs. And in this scenario, the majority of justices would agree that the plaintiff in the Brown case lacks standing and dismiss that case. But we want to recognize that we understand that student debt cancellation is legal. We have the research, we have the data, we have been telling the stories. And so in this moment in time, it's important for folks to understand what is at stake. You know, recognizing that any defeat of a Supreme Court decision is a result of corrupt right-wing majority in the court. That President Biden can use alternative legal pathways to deliver debt relief promised to the 40 millions of student loan borrowers. And that right now in time, we cannot return to payments without relief. Borrowers could not afford the payments to resume without the promised relief. There's a potential for up to 50% of Black borrowers to be pushed into default, effectively pushing Black people into poverty. The American people support student debt relief. We have been crying out for it. We have been advocating it for over a decade now. And so it's important in time that we make sure that we see this happen and the president delivers on their promise. Tomorrow at 12 p.m., we will be meeting at the Supreme Court with our partners, making sure that we continue to share our stories, sign petitions, and stay up to date on the pathways to cancellation. Today, I was at the Supreme Court and I saw the arguments go back and forth between opposing sides. There's a lot at stake now for all of us. And so it's going to take all of us to get this done, to make sure that we get through the finish line and make sure that we are pushing all of our institutions to embrace diversity no matter what. Turning back over to you, Jamal.
Thank you, Leader Cole. If you have a young person in your household, high school, college, elementary school, heck, even preschool, they can be a part of the NAACP and start to do this work to fight forward so that a decade from now and 2 decades from now, we're not seeing more reversals of what should be enshrined as precedent. And so our next speaker is a new member of our team who serves as our national press secretary, who is going to give us some concrete ways in which we can continue to talk about what it is that we are fighting forward on and really frame this out in the appropriate ways. Our leader, Alicia Mercedes.
Thank you, Jamal, and thank you. I'm so proud to be here and speak alongside our national leadership and to be joined by all of you who make this work possible. I'm going to try and be as brief as possible because I know we're coming to a close, but the Supreme Court may be busy overturning our rights, but we're busy getting loud about it. Immediately following the Supreme Court decision on affirmative action today, we released a national statement, including quotes from our president, Mr. Derek Johnson, and our national director of youth and college, Wisdom Cole, who you just heard from. And that statement is live on our website, and you can refer back to it anytime with the link that is in this deck. Immediately following the release of that statement, our leaders were featured across mainstream broadcast and print outlets on everything from MSNBC, the Wall Street Journal, CBS, and the New York Times, as Dr. Tolson referred to earlier. We're going to continue coordinating with national press to push our message of diversity no matter what. As we continue to engage on this issue and work to hold this court and our institutions accountable, it is crucial that we are aligned as an organization on the messages we are delivering to the general public. Our messaging approach is focused on educating and engaging both the general public and our communities on what affirmative action means, what our calls to action are in the wake of the Supreme Court's failure, as well as uplifting our communities as the incredibly talented and hardworking people that we are. So I'm going to dive into some of our key points. First, to hit on the education piece, we need to be discussing how affirmative action has existed because historically we have not been able to rely on colleges and universities to enact admissions and hiring practices that embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. Additionally, we need to uplift the fact that this decision will not only impact the opportunities our young people have to thrive at the university or college of their choosing, but it will impact the representation we have in every space, from hospitals to courtrooms and boardrooms. Now, moving into the engagement piece, once again, we are calling on colleges, universities, and corporations across the country to commit to diversity no matter what. Thank you to everyone on this call for doing your part and signing the petition in real time. Now, what we need you to do is to amplify this with your friends, family, neighbors, hit your group chats, Facebook pages, Twitter, wherever you have a presence. It is crucial to our work moving forward that we maximize our exposure and subsequent participation in this petition. Moving to number 4, we need to uplift the fact that the Supreme Court's decision to overturn affirmative action is not an excuse for institutions to embrace regressive policies that are inherently segregationist and racist. We will not go back, and we expect our institutions to move forward, not backwards. Finally, we need to be clear that affirmative action was never a handout. Black Americans are talented, and we deserve to have our talent recognized by every institution who stands to benefit from it. We want to uplift our communities by conveying that sentiment within our messaging. America has and will never thrive without Black America. This nation was built and sustained on our backs. As we continue to engage on this issue, pushing out our diversity no matter what pledge and uplifting the voices of our experts and our leaders, we will be remaining unified in our messaging. And all of that messaging can be accessed through the diversity no matter what landing page. So please, once again, visit that page, sign the petition, and uplift it with everybody that you know, because we all need to be engaged on this issue.
Thank you, Alicia. As you all can see, this is a layered approach. And so before we jump into a few questions, I want to turn it back over to our President and CEO, Derek Johnson.
Great. Thank you, Alicia, and thank you, Jamal. I want to table set on how decisions of this magnitude can be impacted. One is through legislation, but as a practical matter, we don't have the votes in at least one body of the legislature. That even if we had the votes in the Senate, it would be narrow at best. But in the House, we don't have the votes currently. Secondly, is through the judicial branch, where the highest court in the land have already spoken. And so bring in another lawsuit, pursuing a course of action in the courts would be mute at best, and at worst, we could find ourselves back in front of the same Supreme Court, and they use it as an opportunity to shut down affirmative action even more if you can do that. The other area where we can have influence is at the voting box. Now it's frustrating because as I'm reading the comments, people say, well, what's the practical thing you want us to do? And what are the next steps? And how do we have an impact? Well, truth be told, as the chairman stated early, this is a marathon. There isn't any current bullet. We must be ready and stay ready in case we have an opportunity to shift the balance of power in our legislative body, the House and Senate. But if that doesn't happen, we must stay ready and be ready if there are vacancies that for whatever reasons come available on the Supreme Court, and we advocate strong to ensure this administration nominate, and we fight like hell to make sure a person is confirmed to serve on the Supreme Court. But if those things don't happen, we must be ready and stay ready to impact the outcome of the 2024 election or any special election that come up before then, so that we can have the necessary impact. There are no silver bullets. We recognize that this is a marathon, and it's great for those who come on and talk with a loud voice and with hypotheticals of what we should do. But at the end of the day, if you look at all of the avenues to reverse what has happened and to address the centuries of discrimination and exploitation of our community, then those are the paths I'm aware of. Those are the paths as a practical matter that we all know that exists. And so as an association that's been here for 114 years, our goal tonight is to inform, to get ready, so we can stay ready. So when the time emerges, whether it's a set of special elections before 2024, whether there are vacancies on the Supreme Court and we're positioned to raise our voice around the type of nominee that we need in place, the next thing is making sure we are prepared for 2024 election. Our job is not to mislead you like we're about to turn over concrete in 24 hours. Our job is to inform, to strategize, and stay focused for the marathon run that we're on. Thank you, Jamal.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a marathon and not a sprint. Our vote is our currency. There are a few questions that we want to tackle before we close this evening. One of the biggest questions that has come to the association was, how do we view the carve out in the majority decision that allows for race to be used in admissions decisions for military academic institutions? What does that really say about the decision at hand? Is it a loophole? Is there something to that that we should be exploring. And so I want to turn that over to you, Patrice, first, and anyone else who wants to be able to weigh in on what that carve out really means given the decision.
You know, I think that question really relates to what I stated earlier, is that the military has clearly identified that diversity, equity, inclusion leads to better command decisions, as well as a force that makes use of all of the human resources that are available. For military schools, the service academies, they are typically nominated by members of Congress as well as people who apply individually. And so rather than, this is an underlying policy decision to not run afoul of the plans that the military have made to value diversity, equity, and inclusion, which actually shows that the decision is nonsensical and really not based in reality. But in terms of the practical implications of the military academies, I mean, I think that they should be a focal point for data on outcomes, because what the courts indicated is that they do not favor race-conscious approaches to inputs in terms of the consideration of race. Therefore, I would look to the service academies for the outcomes on how they are graduating folks out of the service academies, as well as cohesion and results, because the military does cover those, get those statistics. So that's how I approach that.
And as you all are hearing this, one of the things that is a major talking point is that if race is important enough to be kept in for military training on the academic side, then that's a signal that it is just as important for all other institutions. And that carve out is something that it's a little sneaky, but it really does show that we can't ignore the fact that if you're going to train men and women to defend this nation with their lives, and race matters, why not on the other side when it comes to traditional academic institutions? So it's a very powerful sort of framework that I think we have to continue to talk about. The next question is about this notion of universities making statements saying that they are going to commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion no matter what already. Jennifer Terry shared in the chat from Swarthmore College that they've already sent a letter to their alumni base saying that they are working with legal counsel to decide how to move forward with their commitment legally. What does that mean for us when universities are already standing up and saying, we're going to commit to diversity no matter what, despite what the Supreme Court says? What does that mean in terms of our strategy and our approach? And this is for you, Chair Russell, President Johnson, Dr. Tolson.
The most important thing, Jamal, about that commitment is that we need our institutions and organizations to affirmatively say how important these programs have been to their institutions and to the students who they serve. It's important for them to speak up and say, we will continue to do this. And so the statements are exceedingly important. They're also important as we build this political force that is going to be necessary to run this marathon. We know that we have to change policy. We need to have the students, the alumni, and those universities support that effort.
Yeah, during 2020, after George Floyd, we saw a lot of corporations that put out statements, and the statements were very diverse in what they said. And one of the things that's going to be important to us, because we've been receiving those statements and we've already taken an early look at them, and there's some ideas that we already have about what we want to see in those statements. One of those things I'll tell you is an investment. We want to see some dollars tied to those statements, because what they'll have to do to maintain their enrollment of underrepresented students is going to cost money. It's going to cost money to recruit more. It's going to cost money to prepare more, to give to advocacy organizations that's helping to eliminate racial disparities at the K through 12 level. and it's going to cost money for scholarships and to incentivize a more diverse faculty. And that's what we'll be looking for. So we're going to come out with a formal mechanism of evaluating those statements. We have one of our own, which can serve as a model to them about some of the things that we want to see in the statement. But we find those statements very important and a key part of our strategic efforts.
Jamal, one of the reasons it's important is because we want to make the Supreme Court ruling irrelevant. And we can do that through the grassroots. And that's why we talked earlier about this body really working state by state and community by community to have the types of conversations and accountability at the local level that are needed to make this ruling irrelevant.
Those are very powerful words. Make this ruling irrelevant. The last question we have time for is actually one that's a bit of a spin. I'm going to read a part of a quote, and then I'm going to tell you who said it. And then I want us to discuss what does it mean to really counter the irony and the politicking that is happening with race, class, and justice. So this quote, this line I'm going to read says, "But for affirmative action, where would I be today?" It was said in 1983 by Justice Clarence Thomas. President Johnson, Chair Russell, I see you're already off mute. How do we cut through the noise and the irony that a Supreme Court justice who benefited from affirmative action, who literally was quoted as saying, "Where would I be but for these laws," is now against it? How do we actually right-size that narrative in this moment?
So Jamal, the reason I came off of mute, and I'm glad you went to that particular question, is that I want us not to be confused. I want us not to be confused. Clarence Thomas is the ultimate beneficiary of affirmative action programs. Whether it started with his ability to matriculate through Missouri and later on to get into government and the EEOC and all of that, he benefited directly from affirmative action. And we have to point that out at every step of the way. But I don't want us to get confused, because there are going to be people who are going to try to make this a Clarence Thomas, Ketanji Brown Jackson issue. Judge Jackson is clearly head and shoulders above where this man is and where he has ever been. Should be clear for those who are on this particular Zoom. The NAACP opposed the appointment and the confirmation of Clarence Thomas to the court. We opposed it because he showed us at EEOC and in his previous positions who he was. He continues to demonstrate that. Let us not get confused. This is not an argument between Black folk. This is an argument about public policy. And public policy is determined by who we put in public policy making positions. So let's understand that we can't get mixed in that false fight. Ketanji Brown Jackson is right.
Yeah, and Jamal, at the risk of getting in trouble again with our comms, I said earlier in the interview, the only problem with affirmative action is that it created Clarence Thomas. He would not be on the Supreme Court but for the program. And at the end of the day, it is our goal to ensure the next set of individuals who are appointed to the Supreme Court take to that court the values that's important to the needs and interests of the communities we represent. And that's key, that public policy and the democracy are the guideposts in which we are directed. Anytime you have individuals like him and his colleagues on the court who obviously are unethical based on most recent reports, these are the type of problems we run into. And those individuals were appointed to the court not by a candidate who majority of our community supported. Oftentimes, those are individuals who were appointed to the Supreme Court by individuals that majority of our communities did not support. So it's really important to play above the fray, focus on the outcomes that we are pursuing, making sure that when we cast our vote, which is our currency collectively, that we get the public policy outcomes that would improve our quality of lives. And Clarence Thomas and his colleagues are individuals who represent the opposite of that. They are unethical, they are intellectually dishonest, and they are creating a path that could cause harm, not just to the African-American community, but to our democracy.
Thank you both for those words. We are coming to a close this evening. Thank you all for participating. We know, as you have heard, there is no silver bullet, but 2024 is upon us, and voting is always an option that changes the game. Thank you to Chair Leon Russell, President and CEO Derek Johnson, leaders Rushing, Willoughby, Tolson, Cole, Mercedes, and McCarthy Wallace. Continue to sign and circulate the petition. This is phase one. We have not stopped and we will not stop. And when we think about our future, we know that it is you in the communities doing the work and the organizing. And as Leader Rushing said, we want to make this ruling irrelevant. And so continue to stand with us, work with us, fight forward, visit NAACP.org. And we will see you again in the future, because this again is phase one of many phases as we continue the fight forward. Thank you and good night.
We will see you at the convention in Boston in 4 weeks.
Yes, Boston in 4 weeks.
Good night, everyone.